throughout the month of May, The Real is celebrating AAPI Heritage Month, a time to acknowledge the accomplishments and contributions of the AAPI communities to the United States and beyond. As we spoke about last week, hate crimes against Asians are still on the rise. So much, in fact, that recently President Biden directly addressed the issue in his speech to Congress. But racism against the AAPI community has been happening for a really long time. And while it's important to celebrate the resilience of the AAPI community, we also want to make sure that we acknowledge the history of what our community has gone through over the years. And to help further our discussion today, I am so honored and excited to welcome two very distinguished voices and dear friends of mine. Our first guest today is a journalist and author who's the host of This Is Life with Lisa Ling on CNN and the upcoming HBO Max docuseries Takeout. Everyone, please welcome Lisa Ling.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Lisa.
So honored to have you. So
It's
great to
crazy
see you.
to
Thank
have
you
you
for having
here.
me.
Yes, oh my gosh, Lisa, I've never told you this, but you actually really even empowered me to start my career in television. Like you being a face in there and you like keeping me to persevere. I'm so happy to hear you here. That's a big deal.
Oh, that means a lot to me, Jeannie, and I adore you. Thank you.
Yes, of course. And joining Lisa is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, author of the best-selling book Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen, and the founder of the media advocacy organization Define American. Please welcome Jose Antonio Vargas.
Hello, Jose.
Hi, you guys.
Hi, Jose.
This is so
Okay, you
great.
guys, I'm not supposed to have favorite Asians, okay? But I'm gonna tell you right now, you two kind of come real close, man. This is so cool for you both to be here.
So excited.
Thank you so much. Hi, Garcelle.
Absolutely.
Hi, Lisa. I miss you.
I miss you too.
I love it. Lisa, so many people are just now waking up to AAPI Heritage Month and learning about the history of the AAPI community. You've actually referred to what's happening now as a reckoning for Asian people. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, yes. And first of all, thank you all and your producers for holding this space to celebrate and recognize AAPI Heritage Month. It is an awesome month. And I hope that now that restaurants are opening up, that you'll go enjoy some amazing Asian food because there are over 40 Asian ethnicities represented in the US. So there's so much to try. And you're so right.
Yes.
I do think that this is really a reckoning right now for all of us in this country. There is a racial reckoning that is happening. And the pandemic has really just exposed so many gross inequities that have existed in this country for generations. And we're being forced to reckon with the fact that our institutions in this country are just rooted in racism. Our healthcare system, criminal justice system, education and housing. And COVID has really been weaponized against Asians to deflect attention from the lack of response in this country to the pandemic. And it's really forced us to look back at how people who look like Jeannie and Jose and I have been treated throughout this country's history, which, by the way, Asian history isn't taught in schools, but it is filled when you start digging in with stories of just egregious and ugly discrimination against our community.
Wow.
And so many of us are realizing that we have to come together, this vast and diverse Asian diaspora, to fight this. And at the same time, this is a reckoning for us because we also have to confront the racism and colorism in our own community if we're going to get to a better place. And as Tyler Perry so eloquently said in his Oscar speech last week, we all have to figure out a way to meet in the middle and refuse hate.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
refuse
Absolutely. Well said. Jose, we've all seen the news about the recent rise in attacks against the AAPI community, but this isn't something new. What do you want viewers to know about the history of racism against the Asian community?
To answer your question, the history of anti-Asian attacks and sentiment in this country is as long as the history of the country itself, right? I mean, the very first federal law that we actually sanctioned and codified were against Asian people. right? That was the Page Act of 1875 and then the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Like, I'm Filipino, right? And anybody watching, if you see an Asian person who has a Spanish name, it means they're Filipino. And there are like about 4 million
I
of
knew
us in this
this.
country. So I live here in California, and 100 years ago in Stockton, in kind of the Central Valley of California, there were actually signs that said positively no Filipinos allowed in the front of hotel rooms. So that's how, how old and also how not far back anti-Asian sentiment has been in the history of this country.
Yesterday, the Boston Globe ran a survey for AAPI month, and it was some interesting things. I would employ everybody to go to the Boston Globe, because there were things like fewer than 1 in 4 Asian Americans feel respected in the United States, and close to 1 in 4 white Americans do not believe anti-Asian racism is a problem. Lisa, why do you think attacks against Asians often go overlooked and underreported?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that our history isn't taught in schools. I mean, as Jose mentioned, discrimination and the scapegoating of Asians has been happening since the founding of this country for more than a century. And I think that the Asian community as a whole is one that has kept its head down a lot and hasn't wanted to rustle a lot of feathers. It's a very big immigrant community, and so when crimes happen, very often people are maybe afraid of reprisals, and they just don't want to. They might be in fear of deportation because of their immigration status, and so very often when crimes happen, people kind of keep their mouths shut. And in the last year, the number of attacks have just grown so astronomically, and we've been publicly encouraging people to speak out and to get involved somehow. If you see something happening, figure out a way to distract or let people know. And it's moving actually to see the Asian community starting to find its voice and exercise it.
Yeah. And not to mention the language barrier on top of that between authorities and the many Asian ethnicities that need help as well.
So true.
Right.
So
That's right.
true. Jose, you just mentioned that you're Filipino. Obviously, Jeannie is Chinese and Vietnamese. Why do you think it is that a lot of people don't understand that there is diversity or the diversity of the AAPI community? And why can that be problematic?
Well, look, like, again, my name is Jose, so everybody assumes every Latinx person is Mexican, and people assume that every Asian person's Chinese, right?
Yes.
And so I actually think that's part of just how in this country we haven't really completely embraced how diverse we are and how much diversity there is within the Latinx community and within the AAPI community. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think there's just a lack of knowledge in general. I mean, this is we live in a country where there are 350 languages spoken. And most of those languages are spoken in immigrant communities, specifically AAPI immigrant communities. Right. And so I think there's just a lack of misinformation and also a lack of really facing how much our country is changing demographically.
Definitely. And we need to teach it in our schools. I
Yes,
don't know.
I can't believe
Jose,
that.
I follow you on Twitter. I thought you were Hispanic.
Crazy,
Right? So
I'm sorry.
I always feel like I have to apologize to everybody and be like, I'm so sorry. I wish
Like
I
you're
were,
letting
but I'm
people
not.
down.
But I'm proud. I'm a proud Filipino.
Do
Right?
not
So I have to tell that to
apologize.
everybody. And
Do
Ginny
not
knows all about this
apologize.
because she's from the Bay. Right? Here in the Bay Area,
Right.
you can't swing a purse without hitting someone who's Filipino. So here, I'm completely comfortable. But when I go to the East Coast or I go to Miami, everybody's like, wait, why do you look like that? And why is your name Jose?
It needs to be taught. Lisa, let's get real. Do you believe that the rhetoric of our politicians and leaders have had anything to do with the recent rise of attacks against the AAPI community?
I absolutely do. I mean, when the pandemic first got rooted here in this country, it was right after I heard Donald Trump call COVID-19. It had a name, the China virus, and he said it with such contempt in his face, and my heart sunk because I knew that people were going to conflate Asian people, and with how this virus and where this virus originated.
Yeah.
And look, we can't escape the fact that words matter, right? And so wherever you are, when you hear this contemptuous language being used to refer to this virus and almost
Right.
targeting an entire people, and when you look at the history of scapegoating of Asians in this country, it shouldn't surprise us that when our elected officials and people in power use this kind of language, that people are going to suffer as a result.
Right.
It'll
That's right.
inevitably lead to violence.